Hello, I'm Alex and this is Gingerhead & Co, my sewing vlog. In this vlog I'm going to talk about cover stitch binder attachments, or binders, of various types. If that's interesting for you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like that. So what are cover stitch binders or cover stitch binder attachments? The attachments that we use to add binding to our project. Usually we add binding to the necklines or to the armholes, but also to the pockets or to any decorative feature that you wish. Because of how they are built, they fold the tape and hold it firmly under your foot. So they save time. What type of cover stitch machine binders are there? They can be single or double fold. That means they fold the tape around your fabric, either from the bottom and the top, or only from the top or only from the bottom. You can actually use every double fold binder to make it into a single fold binder, either by putting a piece of paper or maybe a sheet of very, very thin plastic to block out one of the lips. See? Or even simpler, you can just distort the binding, so you can pull it slightly out and make sure that as you guide your fabric, that the bottom, let's say, is always out. Then you've got a single fold attachment. They vary in sizes, so for example, if you have 36mm binder, it will produce the binding of 10mm. Mine are 40, 36, 28. They can be used with woven or knit fabric, knit binding, but you need to check your attachment if it's suitable for both or only one. The knit binding is usually cut along the biggest stretch, so crosswise, and the woven binding should be cut on the bias. Binders can have a rake for your tape or not. The rake helps because it holds the tape firmly as you sew. They can be generic or brand specific. I've got Baby Lock. Generic binders have pros and cons, as everything. They're usually much cheaper. The difference between a generic binder and let's say a Baby Lock binder can be up to £40, so that's a lot of money. But also some brands don't make them, so you need to have a generic binder if you want to bind your projects. However, there might be some disadvantages of using a generic binder. Generic binders are not all great quality. So I've got one binder from China, that's for my Juki Coverstitch machine. And this is not the best quality. That was £14, but it looks £14, it feels £14, it's quite fiddly. Some are better, so this one, also for Juki, is from Erica Siskrin. And this is definitely a better quality binder, but it was also more expensive. Another thing is that you usually need an adapter plate, so you will need to buy that. And before you attach your binder, you need to attach the binding adapter plate. And quite an important thing to remember is that if you damage your machine using a generic binder not provided by the producer of your cover stitch machine, you can't use your guarantee. So your machine will not be repaired under the conditions of the guarantee, because that's the user's fault. That might be a problem for you, so consider whether you want to risk it or not. I prefer to attach my plate first, but you can test the position of the binder first, screw it loosely onto the plate, attach the plate and then tighten the binder. Make sure that the plate is fixed firmly and doesn't wobble. The washers are used to prevent scratches on your machine. Place them over the screw holes on the plate first. Place your binder sideways on the plate. The lips should be aligned with the outer needle. You'll need to find the perfect placement and adjust the binder. So always use test fabric, scrap fabric to check the position. But even now, you can check the position of the needles in relation to the binder. Screw the binder to the plate. It will need a few adjustments, but before you start sewing, make sure that the feed dogs have enough room to move and they are not touching the binder. Place the binding so that the right side of the binding faces the machine, the letters Juki MCS. Using tweezers, pull out some of the binding. Make sure it lays perfectly flat under the foot. Cover stitch a few centimeters or a few inches to check if the stitch is right. Place the garment, your fabric, between the lips. Make sure that there is no gap between the fabric and the binder. Always check if you're happy with the position and with the stitch. You will most likely have to do some adjustments. Try to bind everything flat. If you have more garments, try to use one continuous binding tape and then cut the spaces between the garments. Go slowly around curves. Anything that is cut on the curve is going to be more difficult to bind, so go slowly. The position here is okay, but the stitch length is too short. And the same process, but I've moved the binder a fraction of a millimeter to the right. So you can see what difference it makes. What are the most common mistakes when using a binder with your cover stitch machine? Probably the most common one is that your tape is going to be too short. You need at least a few inches, so about 10 centimeters more than you think you need. Because as we start and as we finish, we need to have a bit of spare binding tape. Second, really common mistake is wrong placement. Even 1 millimeter off one or the other way is going to make a difference and it can damage your project. The third really common mistake is pulling on the tape, excessive pulling on the tape. You should hold it firmly, but you should not pull the tape as it goes through under the foot of your machine. Another thing is creases on your binding or on your garment, because they will distort the way in which the binding moves. So iron your binding before you start. It's going to make your life much easier. Also, it should be cut properly, so all the lines should be straight. That helps as well. Another quite an important mistake is going too fast. Going too fast, especially along the curves. Curves are difficult to bind, that's why we tend to do everything flat. But if you go too fast, you have no control and you can't really prevent any twisting or the fabric getting from under the binder, so slow down. Another problem that it seems to be quite common is skipped stitches. Skipped stitches can be caused, well, are mainly caused by the wrong needle, the wrong threading, but if you use the binder, you might notice that on the same fabric, it skipped stitches where it didn't normally. That might be caused by not enough presser foot pressure. So the knob at the top of your machine should be screwed a bit tighter, but when you think about it, You go through thick fabric and you need to squash the fabric. That's the same reason why sometimes some machines skip stitches over joints, over thicker, bulkier seams. So if you increase foot pressure, it will squash the fabric a little bit. If the fabric stops moving, that means that it's too high and you have to lower it. Also, to avoid skipped stitches, you might need to increase the stitch length. Remember that you are going through layers of fabric, so it's generally thicker. That's why we always do a sample. Before you start your project, do a sample, see what works better. If the machine skips stitches anyway, make sure that it's threaded correctly. If the machine is self-threading, pull on the thread, check if you have any tension, any resistance. If not, it probably, well, the discs, the tension discs, need a bit of flossing. So a bit of cleaning. Check if there is nothing between them, and you can just floss them slightly. If your machine is not self-threading, it's very likely that you skipped something. So check if the machine is threaded correctly. Another quite an obvious thing that people so often forget about is choose the correct needle for your project. The project is going to be thicker, so choose a bigger size needle. 80 or 90 needles are probably the ones that you're going to use with any sort of binding, unless you are doing something very sporty, activewear, and you're using lycra, then you might go lower. And check with your manual for the type of the needle that you use. I've got 2 different machines and they use different systems for the needles. Another common mistake is letting the binding hang off the table. When the binding is pulling with all its weight, it's not going to be easy to bind. So a solution for that is using a thread holder. I've got a homemade, made by my husband, thread holder. And I use an empty spool that I've got left over because I've used up all the thread. But you can also use an empty loo roll. And when you put it next to you on the table, it's going to be easier to control the binding. And finally, some pro tips. These are mainly for people who work with sportswear, with very slinky, or dancewear, with very slinky fabric, with something that doesn't really want to cooperate. The fabric that is really slinky is generally problematic. So it's good to know some pro tips. Tip number 1, for super slinky fabric, you might want to cut the binding not on the cross grain, but along the fabric. It will have slightly less stretch, but it's going to be much more manageable. Tip number 2. If your fabric really misbehaves, you can starch your binding. You can use spray starch, or you can use potato or corn flour. Of course, you will have to clean your machine and you will have to wash your garment before the first use. Tip number 3. You might want to cut your binding a bit wider than necessary for your binder. A bit means 2, maybe 3 millimeters. For slinky fabric, it's going to help. It's going to be the perfect size. So if your binder is 36 millimeters, well, I've got a 36 millimeter binder. And for my lycra, for my sportswear binding, I use 4 centimeters, so 40 millimeters binding. Another tip, if you want your seams to be softer, so for example for swimsuits or again your leggings or things for your sports, you can use woolly nylon, or well, stretchy thread in your looper. It's going to make the seams much softer. Also, you might want to use the single fold binder for the same reason, because it's less bulk. I hope that helps. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below. If you have any problems or any solutions to the problems, put them in the comments below. And happy binding! Thank you very much for watching. See you soon. Bye!